各位觀眾大家好，歡迎收睇26分鐘見證實錄。加拿大嘅發展呢係融合咗本地人以及移民嘅共同努力而組成。而亞裔嘅參與呢，就更加係喺本國嘅發展歷史之中功不可沒。而喺卑詩省100多年之前，一位名叫雷學日嘅華裔移民，就冒住當年本國對於華裔不友好政策嘅情況之下，由中國移居到卑詩省，並且開始咗佢嘅商業生涯嘅第一間批發公司。而到咗今時今日，佢嘅家族生意呢，就仍然係管理多間省內嘅重要企業。咁提起雷學日或者係雷氏家族，公眾可能會有一啲陌生。不過大家經常會去嘅 London Drugs 以及 IGA 超級市場啦，其實就係雷學日有限公司旗下嘅企業之一啦。不過雷學日以及雷氏家族係點樣由一間批發公司發展成為一間管有多間零售雜貨商店嘅有限公司呢？趁住今個月係全國嘅亞裔傳統月，華裔博物館呢就喺今個月初舉辦咗一個展覽，重點介紹咗雷學日家族嘅歷史。
現代社會係由過去每代人嘅努力編織而成，其中移民嘅故事亦都並冇例外。
The story of the Chinese in this country is indeed a story of innovation and perseverance. Those two qualities were necessary for us to survive since our first arrival in the 1700s. We succeeded then and will continue to, because those who came before us fought so hard to create a place for us.
有人認為歷史係以唔同嘅方式重複發生。透過呢啲家族故事，我哋可以學到啲乜嘢呢？
This is a really an intercultural story. It's not only a story about one Chinese-Canadian family, but the ways in which they faced hardships, and the ways in which they were able to overcome those challenges, and the ways in which they still are able to overcome adversity and give back to the community. There's many parallels that we can draw to our present-day society.
London Drugs IGA 超級市場對於卑詩省民嚟講，呢兩間大型連鎖超市都應該並唔陌生。不過，管理呢兩間超市嘅雷學日有限公司，公眾又對佢哋嘅故事有幾多認識呢？
It's the success story of the H.Y. Louis family, and it really begins with this special window display. It tries to emulate the family living room of the H.Y. Louis family.
位於溫哥華華埠嘅加拿大華裔博物館，目前就正舉行有關早期華裔移民雷學日家庭故事嘅展覽。雷學日喺1898年22歲嘅時候，由中國廣東省移居到本國卑詩省。不過當時加拿大政府正執行華人移民法，向每位華裔移民徵收50蚊人頭稅，而雷學日就係喺呢個時代背景嚟到加拿大。
Hokyat Louis started out as a farmer in Burnaby, and from then on was able to save enough money to purchase a company in Vancouver, Chinatown. And so this was in 1903, where he had left the farming industry and tried his hand at becoming a businessman. So at the Kwang Chung Company, that was the first name of Hokyat's first business. He was also selling seeds, fertilizer, and wholesale produce.
雷學日好快就喺營商上邊取得成就。當時佢同妻子居住喺華埠佐治東街255號嘅商店倉庫樓上。
But it's amazing that Hokyat and his wife were able to raise 11 children here. And below you could see the warehouse where they would have the company vehicles, like the company horse and wagon.
時至今日，佐治東街255號仍然保留住當年雷學日家庭居住時候嘅建築結構，而當年雷氏家族嘅地面倉庫，今日就已經變成一間肉食批發公司。目前卑詩省有相對公平自由嘅營商環境，不過返到去雷學日經營生意嘅20年代尾，當時作為扎根喺溫哥華嘅華裔商人，佢哋嘅待遇就並唔理想。
See, in 1927, the province passed a law to try and regulate the amount of produce that the Chinese were selling. in 1928, there were 143 Vancouver businessmen who tried to again ask the province to limit the number of stores owned by people who were not white.
除此之外，當時嘅中國商人更受到時任溫哥華市長候選人 William Malcolm 嘅直接針對。
William Malcolm was one of Hokyat's main competitors and suppliers. He owned the W.H. Malcolm Company, but he tried to enact a bylaw, and this is a direct quote, to end the expansion of Chinese businesses into Vancouver. This bylaw was not passed, but it was a direct attempt to try and get rid of other companies like the H.Y. Louis Company.
移民喺異地經商本身就已經唔容易，加上呢啲種族歧視政策，令到雷學日同埋當時其他中國商人嘅營商環境變得難上加難。不過，雷學日嘅子女都非常團結，幫助經營家族生意，而其中雷學日嘅兒子雷玉堂更加展現出佢營商嘅智慧。
In the early 1930s, his father brought over 2,000 sesame seeds from China. You can imagine that's quite a lot of sesame seeds. But he overestimated the demand for this product. They realized that although Chinese were used to using sesame seeds in cooking, whether it's sesame seed oil or on jindoi or on other baked goods, it was not common for the Western community.
因此喺開始嘅時候，芝麻嘅銷情並唔理想，而雷玉堂就將呢個情況視作為一個機會。
He approached one of the largest bakeries in Vancouver. It was called 4X at the time. And he convinced them to try out these sesame seeds. And he had to wait a couple of weeks to hear back, but eventually he was able to sell really high volumes of those seeds to Western bakeries. And it really became something that we see everywhere.
雷玉堂喺30年代尾繼承咗佢父親嘅衣缽，接管咗家族生意。喺佢管理嘅期間，公司嘅業務不斷發展，分別喺1955年同埋1976年收購咗 IGA 超級市場同埋 London Drugs 藥房。
He bought London Drugs for $9 million. There were only 10 locations at the time in British Columbia and Alberta. But if we look at the present day, there are now at least 78 London Drugs. It's quite a large company now.
喺1988年，雷玉堂過身，就由兒子雷振營接管咗雷學日有限公司。而喺呢一個展覽嘅開幕禮，雷學日嘅孫雷振營亦都代表雷氏家族出席咗呢個開幕儀式。
I just wanted to say how touched I am and moved that the museum has been able to locate documents.
雷振營表示，再次見到呢啲有關佢家族嘅歷史圖片同埋檔案嘅時候，係一個非常特別嘅體驗。
It's interesting, the stories that we hear when we were children, we never paid much attention to them because we've always viewed them as our parents' stories or our grandparents' stories. And a lot of these pictures and things have been on our archives for 100 years, but nobody gave them much credence. You know, we said we got to get on with living and go towards the future, not worry about the past. And it's only been since the pandemic that we recognized how important these stories are.
雷氏家族除咗係一個成功嘅商業世家之外，佢哋並唔只關注業務嘅發展，回饋社會亦都係佢哋一個重要嘅核心價值。
But we can see how the Louis family has given back to the community ever since Hokyat became successful as a merchant in Chinatown. So even though he experienced direct discrimination, even though he had to weather one storm after the other.
雷振營喺展覽嘅開幕禮上分享咗呢一段有關佢爺爺雷學日嘅故事。
But when my grandfather finally passed away and we finally began to move warehouses, we found a trove of these documents that we never thought existed and we never had an understanding why. We actually saw hundreds and hundreds of these certificates, head tax certificates, and we couldn't understand why they were here. And it was later discovered that my grandfather, because he was quite successful when he came here, spent a lot of his money investing in other people. And basically he paid the head tax for hundreds of people that came into this country.
It became evident that Hokyat had loaned money to many other Chinese migrants who were here in Chinatown and could not afford to pay the head tax because at that time the head tax was equivalent to about 2 years of their income.
而雷學日嘅後人，包括佢嘅仔同埋佢嘅孫，都將回饋社會嘅精神延續落去。
But more recently, you can see the impact that the Louis family has made across British Columbia through the London Drugs Foundation, through other charitable events and activities that they participated in over the years. They've also, I think more importantly, devoted their time. And so in the story of Tong Louis' journey, for example, he really gave his time. He helped fundraise for the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Garden. And that's just one of many examples of the way they've contributed not only resources but time.
雖然雷氏家族一直利用佢哋自己嘅資源同埋能力回報社會，不過雷振營表示，雷氏家族其實同其他移民家庭並冇太大分別。
And so we're no different than a lot of the immigrants that come to this country today. They come to look for a better life. We were very fortunate in the fact that we were able to develop and find it through hard work and through education. So my family is not much different than any immigrant family coming into this country, except maybe we were lucky that we were able to be successful. And so we've always believed that we should be very thankful for that success, and that's why a lot of that has driven our philanthropic desires to give back to the community, which made us successful.
而雷振營亦都表示，因為新冠疫情導致針對亞裔嘅種族歧視再度浮現，呢個情況亦都令佢非常痛心。
We thought it was long gone. In a civilized country in this age, you would have thought that racism should have died 100 years ago or more. And yet, I know that because of my age, I did suffer from it. But you would have think in the last couple of years that our children, our grandchildren that are now young people in this country would not have to suffer what we did. And all of a sudden, these stories that we were all told generations ago came back to our memories.
雷振營見到呢啲情況重現，佢回想起佢父親雷玉堂嘅其中一個教誨，亦都藉此鼓勵受到歧視問題困擾嘅人。
My father had a saying that he passed on to us that he believed in. The saying was, "We may forgive you for discriminating against us, but we don't necessarily forget." In other words, my father believed that we should not let the past, the history of the past, affect us going forward and into the future. He believed that the past is the past, but don't let that influence how you go forward in the future.
喺了解完雷氏家庭喺卑詩省嘅經歷同貢獻之後，喺下一節翻嚟，我哋就會睇睇另一個喺早年同樣為卑詩省帶嚟眾多貢獻嘅法裔家庭嘅故事。歡迎翻嚟節目時間。除咗雷氏家族喺卑詩省大溫嘅地區發跡之外，同樣喺100多年之前，喺卑詩省內陸地區啦，亦都有一個法裔家庭，有住源遠流長嘅家族歷史。Grisham 家族喺19世紀中嘅淘金潮時期咧，就由法國移居到卑詩省內陸，並且創辦咗佢哋嘅家庭牧場。而喺佢哋嘅家族牧場背後又存在住點樣嘅故事呢？
喺華裔博物館入邊，同時亦都有另一個展覽，名為《兩個家庭的故事》（A Tale of Two Families）。唔單止探討咗雷氏家族嘅故事，更加探討咗另一個法裔家庭 Grisham 家族嘅故事。而鍾志怡博士就係呢個展覽嘅籌辦人。
所以那時候很多時間跟不同的家族成員講，那你就會就是在那個過程裡面會了解說，其實他們不同的成員學到的那個，就是說從這個家族裡面帶出來的這些就是一直carry with them in their whole life。
咁樣呢個法裔嘅Grisham家庭又流傳咗乜嘢家族智慧落嚟呢？ Peter Rose 就係Grisham家族嘅後人。
I'm Peter Rose, and I'm the great-grandson of Joseph Guichon, who was one of the pioneers who moved up into the interior of BC to the Nicola Valley.
Peter Rose 嘅曾祖父 Joseph Guichon 喺1864年聯同佢嘅兄弟由法國搬到嚟北美。
Me, like our Guichon ancestors, they came from just a beautiful region in France, and you look at it through the lens of today, and you wonder, why would they leave this culture, this beauty, these streets where all the buildings are carved and this depth of history that is just part of your being.
喺留居故鄉同埋向外闖蕩之間，Joseph Guichon 同埋佢嘅兄弟選擇咗後者，為嘅就係淘金嘅夢想。
Four brothers pack up and leave the comforts and the security and the environment that they know to come over to a place that was just in pretty early development. What a leap of faith, because it would take them weeks and weeks and weeks. And based on what? They couldn't come over here and know that if things didn't work out, there'd be welfare to fall back on or whatever. They could call their mom and say, hey, can you come get me, bring me home or something like that. None of that existed.
Guichon 嘅兄弟當年嘅目的地係美國加州，不過當地嘅發展不如佢哋嘅預期，結果佢哋轉移目標，前往卑詩省。
他們那時候來的話是為了那個 Fraser Goldrush 來的。那在當時剛開始的時候，所以他是1864年到，那1866年到67年的時候，他是為那個金礦的供應商工作。
而 Joseph Guichon 負責當年金礦同埋城鎮之間嘅運輸工作，當中涉及到利用好多馬匹同埋牲口。而喺機緣巧合之下，佢就開展咗佢嘅牧場農夫生涯。
1866年到1867年，他找了一塊地去讓他們的那個就是那些 herd 去 wintering， 就是冬天休息的時候。那在那個時候，他就發現了一塊地，是在那個今天的那個Myriad 跟 Kamloops 中間一個地方叫 Nicola Valley， 他就在那邊找到一塊很適合那個ranching 的那個草地。
而喺1873年 ，Joseph Guichon 就正式喺該位置開設 Guichon 家族牧場，然後 Guichon 牧場不斷嘅發展。喺1880年初，更加協助興建加拿大太平洋鐵路。
那個時候他就說需要很多的那個就是不同的那個物資進去那個 construction site。那就是說他們在這個段時間，那個 ranch 也有為他們為那個 CPR 的那個 construction 提供。
喺協助完太平洋鐵路興建之後，Guichon 家族嘅牧場一直發展。而 Joseph Guichon 預計當時可能會有一個連接 Merritt 同埋 Kamloops 嘅鐵路項目，因此佢亦都為此作出打算。
My great-grandfather, really being a proactive thinker, he decided to build the hotel as a luxury stopover lodge for the railway when it came through, which would have been amazing. However, the railway only came as far as Merritt and stopped. And then it split off into directions going to the Kettle Valley and other places, but the line between Merritt and Kamloops was never completed.
呢間酒店最終喺1908年完工，而喺4年之後 ，Guichon 喺附近興建咗一間雜貨店。其後 Guichon 家族同埋牧場不斷發展 ，Joseph Guichon 就將資產平均分配俾佢嘅子女，而牧場嘅主要經營就喺1918年交咗俾佢嘅長子 Lawrence Guichon 繼續管理。而 Lawrence 唔單止係一個普通嘅牧場主，佢更喺早期卑詩省嘅畜牧業有重大貢獻。
他在 Nicola Valley 的那個就是蝗蟲管理控制委員會任職，然後就是那個年代是大概1920年代的時候，那時候是非常非常嚴重。他們研究了很多 prevention measure， 就是那個防禦的那個工作，然後就是還設立了一些就是 model for later ranching industry 裡面有很多的 standard 要 set up， 像那個就說你怎麼樣 branding， 還有怎麼樣育種，然後怎麼樣就是就是在改良那個 breed， 就是說他這些事情他都是很努力的在做。
Lawrence Guichon 喺退休嘅時候，將家族嘅股份公司解散，然後將擁有權分俾佢嘅二仔 Gerard Guichon 同埋佢嘅外甥仔 Guy Rose。
那 Rose 的话，他跟他的那个得意的那个太太修达，就一直经营了一辈子。他们那一部分叫做Kilchina Ranching 的 company， 然后另外一边是那个Dishon Family Ranch。
而 Guy Rose 就係 Peter 嘅父親。
My dad took the part of the ranch that had the hotel and the general store and what was formerly a polo field that my parents turned into a golf course, and sort of the broad frontage on Nicola Lake. Nicola Lake's Gerard took the end of the lake closest to Kamloops. And so that ranch, which is still in operation also.
而繼承咗牧場嘅 Gerard 同埋 Rose 分別承接咗傑桑家族前兩代嘅成就，為卑斯農牧業作出貢獻。
My dad became one of the heads of the British Columbia Cattlemen's Association. Gerard also received the Order of Canada, which is just an enormous, one of the biggest honors as a Canadian that you can have, and pretty amazing that a guy running a ranch in the interior of British Columbia, sort of again in the middle of nowhere, could be an Order of Canada recipient.
而除咗喺農牧業之外，傑桑家族喺卑斯省各個領域都有成就。
Carrying a little further, his son Lawrence, who took over the ranch from Gerard, Lawrence's wife became the lieutenant governor of BC, Judith Gishon, right? So there's a lot of this pretty high level, how should I say, invitation and admission into the governing structure, I guess you could say, of Canada.
傑桑家族唔單止係專注喺家族牧場嘅發展，其實對當地嘅社區亦都帶嚟重大嘅影響。喺 Nicola Valley 地區，當年大多數嘅居民都係原住民，而法裔嘅傑桑家族係當地嘅少數。不過 Peter 透露，當年佢哋同原住民相處非常融洽。
By and large, we got along pretty great. And I think the main reason for that, one of the main reasons for that, is we went to church with them. I was baptized in that church. I was confirmed in that church. And when I had my confirmation, the people getting confirmed with me, I'm almost certain it would be more First Nation kids that were getting confirmed at the same time as me. And these are the kids I rode the school bus with, and they were in class with me as well.
呢間教會建築亦都曾經被人縱火焚毀，而教會嘅重建就係靠住 Peter 嘅爸爸同埋當地嘅原住民共同努力而完成。
My dad, who, as I said earlier, really got involved in things, he headed up the rebuild of the church. All of the, fundraising and the construction, it was a community effort where it was built basically by, my family and other, call them European descendants in the valley. And the First Nations from the reserve built that church.
傑桑家族嘅成員有好多重要事件，例如婚禮等，都係該教會進行。而喺3年前 ，Peter 嘅父親 Guy Rose 過身嘅時候，佢嘅喪禮亦都喺呢間教會進行。Peter 表示喺喪禮入邊能夠睇到佢父親同當地原住民嘅聯繫有幾深厚。
Harvey McLeod, the chief, gave the eulogy, and I'll never forget where he didn't say, local rancher Guy Rose, or, we knew this guy or whatever. He said that this is our friend. This is part of our community. And to hear that coming from the First Nations and all the reasons they could have to, seriously dislike European settlers, to hear that something really, really special had happened between our family and their family, enough that they honored him that way.
尊重社區入邊唔同嘅人，利用知識為社區作出貢獻。負責展覽嘅鍾志怡博士指出，呢啲就係傑桑家族一直傳承嘅核心價值。當公眾去了解佢哋故事嘅時候，呢啲亦都係值得去學習嘅地方。
因为有那样子的家教跟那样子的传承，所以他们就是你可以看到说，就是在整个就所有家族里面不同的成员里面，这些不同的核心价值是有展现的。那我觉得 在我的研究里面的話，是這個東西是很重要的。
目前華裔博物館咧暫時設立喺華埠嘅漢星體育館大樓。不過博物館咧就正係計劃喺明年咧將館址遷到去另一棟處於華埠嘅歷史建築物永生號大樓。咁喺下一集，我哋就會一齊去睇下永生號大樓背後嘅故事。好啦，今集嘅節目時間咧又差唔多啦。如果觀眾對我哋嘅節目有啲乜嘢意見嘅話，係好歡迎大家以電郵嘅方式同我哋聯絡㗎。如果想重溫翻今集嘅節目，亦都可以上到去我哋嘅網站，點擊節目重溫一欄。下星期同一時間再同大家見面，晚安。